Jai Hind and good morning to all of you. And we've just had an interesting session with the Air Chief giving out so many things very clearly. And my panelists here, now we take this same discussion ahead and we are talking of an ecosystem. So welcome Vivek and Vijender. And my only point here is you are representing the industry. Your individual achievements are well known. But let's take the discussion to a level which is at a macro level where we have to match the national vision with whatever is happening today. So my first question to say Vivek, we can start with this. What do you think is the contribution of the stakeholders beyond the government in the entire ecosystem making, preservation and developing?
Well, it's a nice question that you ask here because of the fact that, we kind of always tend to look at stakeholders in isolation, but then the point is also that when stakeholders come into play, there is a synergy which is always around in there. To kind of give you an example, the industry just cannot grow without having test facilities. Industry cannot grow without actually having the user work in tandem in terms of the product development process. So that synergy is a very, very important thing, and it is very often not talked about when someone mentions the word ecosystem. So I think one of those most important things which has actually happened in the course of the last 5-6 years is the fact that synergy is slowly starting to come into place. Companies today are working much closer with the armed forces, much closer with with organizations that are responsible for bringing into play that closer coordination as well, and that's a positive, no doubt about it. It is just a point which ought to be emphasized here, that same synergy has been going on for the last 3 to 4 decades elsewhere in this world. So we have a lot of catching up to do. Now, besides the synergy point, I believe that one of the most important aspects as far as the ecosystem is concerned is the element of talent, right? Yeah. Buildings can come up, equipment can be bought, but talent and the potential to develop that particular talent over the course of the next decade is so very important that at times we kind of, I've actually seen people go back and say, yaar, hamare paas nahi hai. We've lost it. We've had that brain drain and all of that. I'm actually starting to see the very first signs, at least I've been seeing it for the last 2 years, of that reverse brain drain. And we've seen a lot of very interesting conversations happening between people who've spent the last 10, 15 years in the US and other countries wanting to come back and do something interesting in here. We've actually seen guys come back, join institutions of higher education and higher learning, and simultaneously do startups as well. So I think that is a very, very interesting thing which we're seeing. What the armed forces, especially in this particular instance, need to understand is that they have a very, very important role on working with the industry to ensure that the talent stays in this country. Because you can't go forward and say 2047 I'll have a fully self-reliant India if we don't start laying the foundation today on retaining that talent. And the only way to do that is by enabling the talent to work much closely with the armed forces.
Thank you, Vivek. In fact, you raised a very valid question or an issue related to talent. And when we look at talent, often we hear people saying that there is industry, there's a lot of talent in the country, but there's a gap between when they leave college and when they get employed. In between, there is a major gap. And what do we mean by that? Either the skilling is not there, or maybe the grooming is not there. And the same thing happens in the services also. Initially, when an officer joins, then you need time to groom them, and that means expenditure. So we will come to that slightly later. Vijender, one question which I thought, especially because you're dealing with network security, and as we look at the future, it's going to be more and more data-driven and with the help of AI. Do you have any thoughts? Because when we are developing an ecosystem, we've got to grow much faster in what we are doing with data today and what we should be doing with AI. Any thoughts on that?
Right. So definitely the whole paradigm of cybersecurity has been changing. It was a perimeter-based world. You secure the perimeter and you're secure because you could restrict the movement of the data within that perimeter. Now with the network, the way they have expanded and need making services available to people wherever they are, especially after COVID, uh, that perimeter has pretty much gone away. And that means it's very difficult for us to now restrict where that data is going. And AI is all about data. AI can get meaningful insights from that data. It can be in any form. So that means that nobody has to organize the data now, right? AI itself can find, the right critical insights, from data in whatever form it is. And because the data is available everywhere, now you have this immense problem that anybody can, just go to plain internet, find out who is, what they're doing. All our activities are available on internet, and it's very easy to kind of get those insights and start, attacking, people, right from, of course, the defense establishment, critical infra organization, and for sure the consumers, right? Um, and that's where the whole way we look at security has to change, not from a physical security perspective, but more from a perimeter-less security. That okay, how we'll make sure that how much data is going where, right? And even if that data is going, how that is anonymized or that cannot be weaponized, against the ecosystem or the establishment. Yeah.
Thank you. So again, coming back to where we left, Vivek, you left at a point where you said about the talent part. And I prompted you that how do we bridge this gap between the school, college, people with CGPA of 9 plus or 90% marks, but still not job ready. So you could cover that one issue. And in addition to that, to enable a system to function faster in time, you need changes in the processes and the policies. No process or policy is cast in stone. So, any thoughts that you would like to mention? These two issues you could cover.
I'll take the first question. So your point about that bridging of the gap. Um, so everyone is basically colored by their own experiences, right? So I'll give you our perspective, and it may not be the right one. There might be other people who have different viewpoints on this. Point number one, that gap exists across the world. So you have Americans who come out of their engineering schools. Thankfully, they have a certain approach in there which is more about working very hands-on. So you might have someone who's kind of working through engineering school, at a factory or a plant or at a company, and then he kind of works on those projects, and that helps him basically reduce that gap. In India, what we're trying to do at this point in time is, most of the defense companies that I've known have had promotion of internships. So companies basically would bring on board people during the course of the engineering school. They would not even go in for engineers at times. I've actually seen some brilliant engineers come out from qualifications which have nothing to do with engineering, but just purely, there are people who would like to work in certain areas and have the capacity to kind of do that, and hard work and attitude to do that. Now, in terms of bridging that divide, the most important thing is getting people to work on actual projects, right? I know of people who've told me that, 10 years back, if someone, for example, we work in the area of weapon systems, right? One of those most complex areas because of the fact that it's not common for someone in India to go out, find weapons, work on them, right? Yes, it's very common to find people who can do coding because it's much easier to do that. The infrastructure is much easier to do, to kind of find. Now, if I need to have people wanting to work on weapons, then I need to be able to have them access those weapons, access training facilities to know what exactly happens in there, right? That was just purely lacking. I mean, until we actually set up infrastructure and started working closely with the armed forces, it was just impossible for any engineer to understand how weapon systems work. Most of these guys have just looked at weapon systems in YouTube videos. They've never managed to go out there and see how the weapon actually works. What is it that makes it good? What is it that does not make it good? Now, that gap has to only come from industry. So which is to say that when talent comes into uh, into the plants, into the training centers, is when they actually start learning. Uh, that massive gap that we have in India vis-a-vis the rest of the world is something that we have to kind of, you know, uh, start working on in the course of the next several years. That's the first part of the question. May I have the second question just so that
The policies and processes, and this is a whole of nation approach in which it's not only related to Ministry of Defense. There are many policies, like the first part which you mentioned. There would be some policies required, some processes to come into place, enabling policies. And in case there are certain things for the other ministries as well, which will help an ecosystem to be created or preserved, consolidated, and possibly even built up further. So anything to do with policies and processes.
you actually asked me a very controversial question. Right?
We are here for that, no?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very controversial question. So I'm going to go back to a podcast that I think Gaurav had done with Mr. Kalyani. So he was talking about the fact that in India, pretty much everything which is to do with defense manufacturing requires industrial licenses. And at some point in time, it used to take close to about 5 years until there was one bureaucrat who walked in and said, fine, let me figure out how to get this sorted out. And from 5 years, it just turned out to be 2 to 3 weeks. We've had similar experiences where the average time that it would take to obtain licenses was very, very long. To this day, please understand this, right? You don't work in isolation. There are certain components that we will still have to import. It's not possible for us to kind of import. Suppose I need to do research and development on a new round of ammunition. I don't have that ammunition in India. I'll have to import from the United States of America or maybe some other country. Now, what happens when you have to do that? You have to go through the entire set of processes. Because it's R&D, I have to go through certain processes to be able to get hold of that ammunition and then do this reverse engineering. But it's a very elongated process, and it does kind of sap your entire patience, sap your entire, ability to have faith, right? And that's not good. I actually don't believe that's good, because the job of government at some point in time is to start trusting Indian industry. We're not here to basically sit around and, play around or, burst firecrackers in the back, or for that matter, do hacking, unethical hacking, so to speak. We're trying to basically build systems here. And the only way I can do that is also by the government of India stating, fine, I understand this. We're not 100% self-reliant today. We need to be getting there to 100% self-reliance. This is what we will do. We will support you in these matters. But just come back and tell me, what is it that you're trying to do, right? That itself will solve the problems. Sometimes we kind of wall ourselves. Government tries to wall itself in the hope that it'll be, felt as being very, very fair. That doesn't help. Sometimes you have to break those walls, go out and ask, how do I help you, right? So I think that procedures sometimes really sap the energy of private sector and industry, and there'll be plenty of people here from the industry side who can attest to it. Let me be very honest about it. We're not getting there to this day. As far as procedures are concerned, or rather, let me put it this way. Everyone likes to talk about armed forces buying stuff, right? I'm not going to talk about buying here, because that's a completely different discussion. We can avoid that discussion for now. What I want to talk about is the solutioning approach, which I've seen amongst many countries.
Absolutely, correct.
So you have a problem. State the problem. Don't say, this has to be what I need. State the problem, explain the problem, figure out whether industry can offer the solutions. And don't go for big bang procurements, because every time I've seen here, when the big bang procurements come is where the whole world wants to play. And I'm talking very, very selfishly here. We're not here to kind of, not only, our objective, of course, is profit motive. Besides profit motive, we have the objective of also doing nation building. I agree there. But what happens is when you kind of have those big bang, massive, huge, procurements, you lose the solutioning approach. You basically are wanting to buy something which isn't there. And that solutioning approach, because it's not there, you're always going to be stuck with something that is going to be applicable for maybe 2, 3 years, 5 years at best. What happens after that? To give you an example, suppose I need to have a weapon which has got to have a range of X, Y, Z, should have AI integrated with this, should have the ability to kind of, correspond with the need of the hour, maybe an anti-drone kind of an operation. put that out as an approach here, bring in the industry and say, this is the time you have, 6 months. We don't take it on to 1 year, 2 years. If you're able to deliver something out in 6 months' time, what happens immediately is that I will start funding that project. It may not be like 1,000 units of something being bought, but it's 100 units of something being bought. The good part about doing that is that industry, once it is able to deliver to that 100, right, may not even require large orders to come from the government of India because there are phenomenally large export markets available to all of us.
Correct. Okay, Vijender, I just want to ask you specifically, you are into the cyber domain. Futuristic warfare, everything is more or less getting controlled or infringed upon by cyber. Now, whether we look at information warfare or you look at space, and everything is going to be controlled or impinged by cyber. Communication now we are shifting to laser whenever we do. So how do you see the future unfolding and how can Indian ecosystem come up better there?
Right, so I heard from Major Arya that cyber warfare is like very actively being tracked as one domain of warfare, and this is a domain which affects not just the borders but pretty much the whole country, right? I mean, you don't have to pick up a gun to kill anybody now. You can go and start playing around, take remote control of a nuclear powered system and tune the parameters without anybody knowing, and you can have a chaos in a city like Mumbai, right? So when it comes to cyber warfare, like I said, that because the data is so much available, right, and with the internet available pretty much anywhere, the data that is going out, that is being weaponized today. And the first thing that I see is that how do you ensure that what data is going out, of the organization? Also, through which communication channel the data is going out? Because right now, I mean, anything that is flowing over the wire, over the air, over satellites, is being captured, monitored, and people are taking insights, out of it. So much so that today's encryption method that is there, which is based on the latest protocols, is susceptible for absolute decryption in next few years once the quantum computers will be commercially available. And some governments might already have working prototypes which are not yet disclosed, and they are capturing that data today, which will enable them to decrypt the data that we are transferring today, right? And in simple terms, what I'm saying is anything that let's say if I am transferring money to somebody, if a government department is sending a critical file, if a contract is being negotiated between two defense organizations, or any critical defense insights are being shared, all that is encrypted using standard protocols, which will be open absolutely in next few years. And we know that the data of previous years is also useful to kind of build intelligence on what India was doing like 5 years back, what they were thinking, because the plans are pretty much made for next 10 to 20 years, right? So there are advancements that are needed now, and that's where the software industry need that support, right, of that creation of that ecosystem. Now, 10 years back, of course, the Make in India initiative was launched, where in all the software procurement, preference was given, to the Made in India companies. I think that was a great initiative. It has helped a lot to companies like us and other companies built in India working in the cybersecurity domain. Because before, like if you say you're an Indian company, you won't even get a meeting, right? So now we definitely get the opportunity to showcase our solutions. But I was just looking that, okay, what is the cybersecurity spend of defense right now, right? So out of $75 billion, the budget for cybersecurity spend by the defense MOD is just 90 million, which is 0.001%, right? And the 2047 outlook that we were looking at, and Dr. Sharan mentioned that around $200 billion will be the defense budget. Imagine if just 0.001% is cybersecurity spend, that's like just $500 million worth of spend. We are a small company today, and we are already a $100 million organization. Now, for a company like us to focus on building more and more technologies here, we need that there should be capability for us to grow as well. right? So if the budget itself is going to be so small on cybersecurity, it is not going to attract too many companies to start building here.
Okay.
If you see, close to like 90% of the cybersecurity companies that we see today, they are very much focused on the US and European market.
Yeah, very
The moment you have a product market fit, their obvious choice is to go and set up a company in the US or in Singapore, move the IP there, because they see that the market is pretty much bigger there, right? And that's how we are kind of, we have the capability to build a lot of cybersecurity solutions here, but we very fast, we lose that IP, to the other countries. So as Vivek mentioned, that the brain drain has stopped. It is now reversed, to a great extent. But that is majorly for the services organizations, right? I mean, before COVID, you do an interview of any software engineer, the first question that they will ask is, are you going to send me an on-site, or no? In last 4 years, that question has completely stopped. Like nobody is now looking to go to US, to settle down. But then, how many product companies are there, and what is the market size for product companies? So I think the capability is there. We are intelligent people. We have the capability. We do a lot of hard work. What we need is enough market size and the solutioning approach and the opportunity from government and defense department, so that we can focus on completely on building technologies here and keeping that IP also here.
Vijender, one quick follow-up question here itself. While you are all looking at users basically, a large segment of that is the services or the public sector, for example, which is into manufacturing. But there is an equally bigger component in the private sector also. And their cyber security is possibly more important than what we are doing today. And we've had incidents of some private industry which is into defense getting held up for ransomware. So what is your advice to the private sector which is in defense?
Right. So I mean, definitely with private sector, we do see much better traction and adoption, and that's where I was saying that that how many companies are there to build more and more cybersecurity solutions, right? That's what Sir also mentioned. Dr. Sharan also mentioned that we have enough budget, we may have enough money, but that ecosystem does not exist to kind of motivate companies to build more and more IP here, right? So, and private sector is definitely open, but there is more competition as well. There are no guidelines as such there. Plus, we still believe that the whole Indian private ecosystem is also not that big right now. But as the economy will grow, that market also will keep on growing. But I think with the government is like, we look at government as the biggest buyer, right, in India.
No, I would slightly add on to this. A population of 1.4 billion population is the client, actually speaking. And if you have somebody like Sridhar Vembu, who's put up Zoho as an antivirus solution, if I ask in the hall, please raise hands who are using Zoho. Let's see if people are using Zoho here. You see the response. So I would like to draw the attention that it's not only the formal kind of an agreement or an arrangement. Every citizen is as much a user of what you manufacture.
Right, so Zoho, the majority of their revenue is still coming from outside India.
Yeah.
And they are, cybersecurity for them is a very small portion. The majority of that is like the general application. So definitely their user base for a population like ours is absolutely a great user base, right? But when we look at cybersecurity is more focused on certain elements, not just necessarily on the users as well.
No, my point which I was trying to drive when we keep talking of whole of nation, where does the citizen come into it? He is as much responsible as the government is. So that is what I was saying, that while the entire world is looking at us as 1.4 billion market, so we ourselves should also contribute in that manner. That's just a point from the citizen's point of view. Vivek, coming back to you, when you mentioned so many things, and especially both of you mentioned about the reverse migration. And brain drain is actually coming to a stop, or so to say. We obviously need to go abroad, get empowered in technology. People have to have their aspirations. They earn money. then they come back and invest here. It's a large number of people doing it. The government also went in and the OCI card, which made it easier for the people to come back. Anything more that you would suggest so that we can get better in this? Because on one end, we want to do joint ventures. Joint ventures means we want to get technology from outside and they must have the Indian partners. But obviously then the preference could be our people only coming back with technology. Is there any suggestion that you have to speed it up?
Well, so let's not uh, uh, you know let's take examples for a second. Now, you know how the Chinese have worked. You've had Chinese go in, work in the best of the organizations, all the FANG companies, work in defense contractors, and then one fine day you'll actually start seeing those guys slowly move stuff back home. And this has been a governmental enterprise for several years. Let's not make any let's not kind of sugarcoat this one. It is a governmental effort as far as the Chinese is concerned to send people into developed markets, learn how those guys build technologies, bring those technologies back to their home country. It is not a private effort. It is a governmental effort.
So that's where my first question was, what policies do you want to recommend? Because the government will have to enunciate policies and get it implemented.
And I think as a policy, it is impossible for us to do that, what the Chinese do, right? Which is to say, encourage people to kind of go steal secrets and come. That's out of the question. I mean,
so what is the policy that you recommend?
So instead of policy, sir, I think what is far more important is this. Let me take an Israeli example. So what would happen in Israel is that you had a lot of people who would kind of work inside the army in special units and then, either build certain, certain hardware or software which was very interesting to the Israeli army, and the Israeli army was very quick to adapt all of this. But what the IDF also realized at some point in time was that you had all of these guys coming out and then, starting to work in companies and losing that touch of sorts, which is why they created a separate venture fund. That venture fund was initially just purely supported by the government of Israel. In due course of time, you had financiers like JP Morgan and other guys actually walk into that space and say, fine, I'd like to take a share of this particular pie too. To this day, we do not have a venture fund which is being sponsored. I'm not talking about a grant, I'm talking about a venture fund. Now, the difference between a grant and a venture fund is that the venture fund is actually trying to invest in companies and make sure that those guys go across to the next level, you actually make money. There is actually a motive to generate returns out of that. I believe there is a phenomenal opportunity for the government, the Ministry of Defense, and the private sector to join hands and create a separate fund of funds or a venture capital fund which actually invests in startups. What that will do is it will send a signal to the guys outside saying kind of, you know what, if you've got technologies, I'll find a way in which these technologies get into the mainstream defense enterprise. And the more that this happens, all you need is basically 2 or 3 successes. There's a very interesting book called Unit X, written by a person called Raj Shah, that talks about how the Americans had actually lost touch with the changes that were happening in Silicon Valley and how they had to create a venture fund of sorts in a standard venture fund kind of a model to enable those technologies which were already being developed in Silicon Valley to come back into the defense enterprise. Otherwise, defense contractors were using Windows, right? Windows NT or whatever version that was, while the rest of the world had already moved on.
So valid point. In fact, your point about fund of funds, I accept that absolutely. And you touched on a very interesting point, how Israel, the people who come out of IDF after the conscription, how they are readily available and the industry grows based on their experience, hands-on experience as it happens. And to that extent, if we were to look at Agniveers coming out after 4 years, they'll start coming out. What is the future that you see of their integration with the industry?
I think one of the good points that will happen is that you'll have a bunch of people who've gone through that round of discipline, who've understood, the nature of use of weapon systems, the nature of use of drones. Some of them might even have, taken on the interest to understand complex areas like coding and, AI and all of that. Now, when you are 4 years in the forces and then you come out, you're moldable, you're far more moldable to kind of come into mainstream corporate. And I think that's a positive thing, because what corporate India and industry India is looking for are people who've had legitimate experience in the armed forces, who are quick to move thereafter once they come into corporate, because the pace of movement between the government and corporate is substantially different. We tend to kind of take decisions on a daily basis, live with the consequences of those decisions, and move on if they don't work. So I think that's a positive thing. In fact, our experience has been that even with people who've spent enough time in the armed forces and come into mainstream corporate, it might take a little longer, but then they're very quick. And we've actually had the best benefit of bringing on people from the armed forces into industry. Pretty much my entire testing team, our entire testing team is all armed forces. And some of those people have actually migrated to doing design along with the actual designers.
Okay, thank you. One last question, Vijender, before we come to the final round, where you are an alumnus of the AIT Pune. You had your education there. And do you have any suggestions there to ensure that we improve on the future generations coming out and getting incorporated into the defense industry?
So from Army, AIT itself, or
any educational institution, AIT in particular,
right.
You've been through that. You know, maybe it is slightly different from the other educational.
Right. So, yeah, AIT is a unique college run by AWS, and I'm a pass out of 2003 batch. When I joined the college, I went there with the goal that I will get the chance to interview for Army and I will be able to join Army. Apparently, I realized that, if I join Army, there will be a certain way of service that I will be able to do, and I'm very proud of my father and the institution that has supported me. But then my interest was in technology, and most of the engineers who are coming today to AIT, they have the opportunity to serve the forces through the use of technology, right? So so I would say there are definitely people who have absolute interest in joining Army. There are all type of students come there today. But I feel very proud that while working with defense forces now as a technology provider, I am able to serve the forces, and I think we would want to encourage more and more engineers to start building these critical technologies, start participating there, so that we can contribute that way. And I'm of course the Agniveer kind of initiatives are already helping to bring in people who can serve at the borders, and we would want to act like Agniveers who are working on the cyber warfare front.
That's a real good thought. Final thoughts, Vivek, 30 seconds to you.
We talked about the ecosystem, just wanted to put out one last point. Ecosystem, as you said, represents the whole series of companies, but everything is so deeply linked today. When the Russian war started, the actual fact is this: we started suddenly getting requirements not for ammunition, etc. We started getting requirements for CNC machines. Understand this: armed forces, suppliers of machines. That is a level of linkages we are actually seeing to this day, and we still do not understand. I certainly believe that we are still trying to kind of come to grips with the fact that those linkages are so deep that a country like Russia, which was priding itself on the fact that they had all kinds of equipment, had to go running around the world to find CNC machines.
Yes, absolutely.
So that networks, please understand this, will become very, very critical when we have the next war.
Yeah, final thoughts, Vijender, 30 seconds.
Right, so looking at the budget number, I think my request would be to start looking at increasing that spend. And I'm not speaking just for me, but defense organizations have to start looking at things critically. And there are already a lot of initiatives there. But look, I mean, sitting in my office, I think that people know what are the threats, right? And then we hear about incidents that happens at certain organizations, and then I recall that, okay, we spoke about this kind of threat like 2-3 years back, but there was not enough urgency to solve this. A lot of time we close our eyes and we think that, okay, you know what, who is going to take so much of efforts, right? But all these events that are there in the news, I think they are the issues only that we know of. There are a lot of issues which have already happened which we are not aware of, right? And we deal with some of those incidences when it happens with our customers, and then of course they move in a reactive approach. I think with cyber, look, with the physical security, we can see, okay, how many planes we have, how many tanks we have. We can inspect them, and we know that, okay, if a mechanical part is working fine, it's fine. There's no threat. With software, and with software taking control of all of our information systems and network, we just don't know what is there inside the software itself.
Correct.
So there is just too much of, either it's like, okay, hame kuch nahi hoga, right? Okay, we have got something as a checkbox. I think the threat is too deep, right? What happened in Israel, the pagers, blasting, right? I think that is one eye-opener. What happened in our software industry with SolarWinds, which is a software used to manage the network, was infected with a Trojan, and that kind of suddenly woke up one day. I think those are the deep issues with software. And I think while I hear that, okay, we want to manufacture everything here, I see that the reason to do that is because we have to trust our own people, because our own people are accountable for the security of our own nation.
Thank you both of you for an interesting discussion. And to the audience, just want to apprise you, we are in interesting times, changes are happening, and we've just started. And the only thing we have to do is to speed up and to ensure that whatever we are going to manufacture, it has to be affordable as per our budget also. Thank you so much. It's been a very interesting discussion.